strikes the ground. When that left foot strikes the ground. I said all I want is here. All I want.
My very first student was actually my younger brother, Sean. He wasn't really a singer himself, but he desperately wanted to get into Georgia's All-State Chorus. And I was in high school at the time and barely knew anything about singing myself. But I remember I was obsessed with sound. And the most puzzling question to me was one of imitation. Specifically, how do we unlock the ability to sing, to create these beautiful musical sounds? At the time, like everyone else, I believed it was a matter of talent. So this divine gift that a small percentage of the population gets to have. And then I remember one day I was listening to a baby crying, and I realized this was something we were all designed to do. It occurred to me that singing was much closer to crying than even to speaking. Well, Sean got into Allstate, and I realized I definitely had an instinctive gift for understanding the mechanisms behind the what is, particularly with sound. I realized I had a knack for, as one of my students recently put it, demystifying the science and process behind the human voice. One of the questions I get asked most frequently is, who should I study with? It's no secret that voice teachers are a highly competitive bunch. It's not like there's an official licensing to call yourself one. All you have to do is attempt to be a singer yourself and then try to teach people what you did to make that sound. Kind of like being a driving instructor because you know how to drive a car. But the voice is so much more complex than that. And as it turns out, knowing how to sing isn't even very helpful in figuring out someone else's imbalances. In fact, it's more often the case that the more naturally singing comes to you, the harder it is to be an effective teacher of singing. But nonetheless, starving artists find they can make much more money than waiting tables or flipping burgers if they throw a keyboard in the corner of their apartment and say, "Hey, I'm a voice teacher." So they read a bunch of books and try to organize what their own voice teachers taught them over the years and open shop. And then they realize that a high percentage of their colleagues are doing the exact same thing. So even though the demand is high, the competition is just saturated. So they go about differentiating themselves from each other. I'm the pop voice teacher. I'm the one who worked with Whitney Houston back in the day for that one session on her last album. Or I'm the go-to Broadway coach. I'm the Juilliard graduate. I'm the breathing specialist. I won the singing competition. I'm the guy who won't make you sound like an opera singer. I'm the guy that thinks anyone other than opera singers can't really sing. And on and on and on and on. But ironically, in spite of making themselves seem specific, they try to be everything for everybody without considering the individual needs of the client or their own weaknesses and strengths. So in my experience, before you ask the question, who should I study with, there are 3 other questions you should ask yourself. First, what should I study? How should I study? And most importantly, why am I even studying? For some reason, people assume that whatever song they're assigned is going to magically condemn them into being that type of singer. Like, just because you sing a show tune, for example, doesn't mean that you'll suddenly start waving top hats and tap dancing around your living room. When it boils down to it, a song is a collection of a bunch of notes in a clump of rhythmic gestures set to an approximation of a bunch of sounds in that particular language. The purpose of repertoire from a pedagogical standpoint is to introduce new muscle coordination and patterns so that they can refine their behaviors and get rid of associative habits. One of the reasons classical music is so often assigned is specifically because most of it is in a foreign language and therefore doesn't have the associative speaking habits that one carries with them when singing in their own native language. So all songs are exercise. And you don't want to avoid certain weights or machines at a gym because you think that they're going to bulk you up too much or make you too stiff. Just as fitness is a combination of cardiovascular health, muscle tone and conditioning, and flexibility, and the ideal athlete has all three, likewise, an excellent singer needs to have great technique, interpretation, and artistry. A competent teacher, therefore, is going to train these aspects separately but thoroughly and not make you sound like any particular type of vocalist other than yourself. In fact, the most flexible singers should have the ability to command multiple styles, not just one in particular, and the lion's share of training is technical anyway. So the idea is not to only build off the music one really enjoys, but to explore the physical coordination that goes into all genres.
Who's there left to rescue when my princess runs?
The key is to observe the imitation for its effectiveness and imitate multiple functionally efficient sources.
North and south and east, west of your life, I have only one request of your life. A strange new world, leave all thoughts of the life you knew before. Let your soul take you where you long to be. Only then can you belong to me.
It is true that people learn not only at different rates, but also in completely different ways. There are generally three terrible habits, for example, I find inexperienced teachers fall into. And those are, 1, teaching solely through their own filters, the way they were taught or the way they discovered how to sing. 2, teaching a result as a process. In other words, sound like this, or hit this note like this, or find your way to this so that the this becomes more important than the how. And what I often find is singers who are taught this way have significant compensatory tension issues because they're so focused on listening to the sound that they've been taught to make that they stop listening to their bodies and consider there might be a much easier way to get an even better result. And 3, I said there were 3, rushing too quickly to just sing through a song without breaking down the component activities. So their idea of a warm-up is less than 10 minutes long and involves almost immediate vocalizing in the warm-up and then jumping into a song and then correcting it by criticizing the way they're breathing or what vowels they're using without even considering what caused the vowels to be the vowels in the first place, etc. So, to combat all of this, in 2002, I developed the first vocal assessment. This was a one-of-its-kind objective, meaning numerically scored, diagnosis of the singer's physical abilities, and even to some extent their potential as a singer. The assessment didn't only tell them where they were and how much improvement they needed, but answered specifically what type of training they needed, as well as answers to the questions they never knew to ask, like, what are my perceptual filters, or am I more imitative or adaptive, or what gender of teacher or voice type am I going to respond more quickly to? Where in my body are my particular physical issues? What about psychological issues and how are they impeding my physical result? How much should I be doing technique training versus singing through material versus physical or mechanics training? What is my ideal repertoire given this diagnosis? And so on and so forth. The application of this is done through a specialized curriculum we call Integrative Voice Training, or Vocal Integration, wherein we utilize the appropriate and balanced custom prioritization of 6 vocal techniques based on the client's particular needs, kind of like a DNA for singing training, as well as training in musicianship and theory and interpretation, artistry, onstage performance technique, even career coaching, to create the most organic and well-rounded singer possible. In the end, my goal is that singing becomes a completely subconscious discipline, not unlike running or talking. wherein the focus is on what you are saying rather than how accurately or prettily you're saying it. The last question is, of course, why? Which is a very personal and yet very important part of training. When you're learning how to play a piano, there's frustration. I'm reminded of the Sesame Street character Don Music, who bangs his head repeatedly on the piano whenever he has writer's block. The worst you can do in that case is judge your hands as incompetent or your ability to get a coordination right, and usually, it ends there and you forgive yourself and it's no big deal. Your voice, however, especially your singing voice, is one of the most vulnerable and judgeable aspects of your value as an individual. I was telling my students in a recent stage anxiety lecture that we value music because it's the closest thing to alchemy we have in real life, and singing in particular. I often tell clients that their voice is the face of their personality. So more than anything, the why has to come from a real desire to evolve the voice inside of you every bit as much as the one that we hear outside of you. So think about that. For that reason, it's a long process to do it right, to not learn a few tricks and adjustments or just sing the right notes at the right time while you stand on stage and look like you're getting a root canal. It's really about organically altering the human instrument and therefore the human experience. It's an integrated instrument. And I feel, short of total spiritual enlightenment, I honestly can't think of something more thoroughly rewarding than that.